exciting to be here. My name is Tayana, and before our conversation with Deepak Chopra and Anoop Kumar, we have a very special musical offering for you. Adam Bauer, who we are delighted to welcome back to our stage, has recently released his second album of beautiful kirtan music called The Wonderville. He will be sharing a few songs from that album with us. And we offer this as an invocation of sorts, an opportunity to land, to connect to our breath, to drop in, and to open our hearts. Please welcome Adam Bauer to the stage.
Thank you all. It's an honor to join you all tonight, and it's always a pleasure to gather with the ABC Home family. So it's a pleasure to be here.
Shri Ganesha, Jai Ganesha, Om Ganesha, 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 Shri Ganesha, Jai Ganesha. Bolo Shri Ram, Jai Ram, Jai Ram, 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 Bolo Shri Ram, Jai Ram, Jai Ram, Shri Ram, Jai Ram, Jai Ram, Bolo Shri Ram, Jai Ram, Jai Ram, Shri Ram, Jai Jai Sitaram, 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 Sitaram. Sitaram, 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 Sitaram. Jai Sitaram, 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 Sitaram. Sitaram, Sitaram, Sitaram. Bolo Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Ram, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Om.
Lena, did I see you enter? Come sit here if you can, next to Paulette. I want you to meet them. Okay, how's everyone? So a while back I met this guy. He's Indian, he's an MD. He talks about consciousness, so I thought he must be good. Right? Indian, MD, consciousness. I don't know if everybody got that. But Anoop is an MD. He's an emergency room physician. Grew up in the United States and had a very interesting environment at home, exposed to Vedanta. But let's start with first the material in your book. Why is it called Michelangelo's Medicine?
All right. Well, it's an honor to be here. Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Deepak. Thank you, Paulette. So, a couple years ago, we visited Florence, myself, my wife Malini, and my son Surya. And while we were there, we saw David, Michelangelo's David. And it just so happened at that time, I was writing furiously this book. These ideas were coming to me. I was just trying to transcribe as fast as possible whatever was coming to me. And when the idea that I really wanted to get out was, I went through my training in emergency medicine and I was practicing in the emergency department. And what I saw was that our model of the human being was remarkably incomplete. Our model of the human being as just a physical thing, when all of us know we are much more than a physical thing. And so I wanted to somehow describe a more complete anatomy, or the complete anatomy of the human being, so that we could appreciate the knowledge not only in allopathy, which I learned and Deepak trained in, but also Ayurveda, which he also knows well, and all the other healing systems, including meditation. Ultimately, both meditation and surgery work on the same subject, which is the human being. But why is it that we can't reconcile them? Why is it that we don't know the mechanism of one and how it relates to the other? Well, it's because our model of anatomy is so incomplete. And so when I was in Florence and I saw David, Michelangelo's David, it was just such a beautiful statue. And not just, I had been told about the anatomical detail of David. So if you look at the back of his hand, you can see the veins in his hands, for example. You can see the determination in his brow. So there's the anatomical detail, but it radiates a presence also. And what struck me is that Michelangelo, when he saw the human being, he saw something much more than a physical structure. And I thought, wow, wouldn't it be amazing if medicine saw that too? If all of medicine could see that we, human beings, are much more than something physical. So that was the inspiration, and I was talking to my sister about it, and in this conversation, this came up, this title of, Michelangelo's medicine, his vision of medicine. We'll never know what it might be, but we know that it would be based on a much more complete picture of what we are.
So in the book you describe these different bodies. Talk about them.
So the model offered in the book is that of the three bodies. And when I wrote this and when I had people reading the book afterwards, for comments, for feedback, some people said, why not 5 bodies? So, when I had learned some Vedanta, we had learned about 5 different layers of the human being. Some people say 7, It all depends on how you want to divide up the human being, how you want to draw the map. I felt that 3 was perfect. It wasn't too complex. It wasn't too many. And yet it wasn't too simple. It captured something that I think every single one of us can experience, aspects of ourselves that every one of us can experience. And those are the 3 bodies, the first being physical, the second being mental, and the third being energetic. So going from the most outer and apparent aspect, the physical, a little bit deeper to the mental, a little bit deeper to the energetic, and finally the realm beyond that, which is consciousness. It's not really a 4th body. It is that which pervades and appears as the other 3.
So these are maps, and obviously maps are not the reality, but maps help us navigate reality. And as you're speaking, and my understanding of Vedanta, they talk about the physical body, which is prana and annamaya kosha, physical and energetic. The sukshma sharir, which is the subtle body, mind, intellect, and ego. And then beyond that, the awareness that in common parlance would be called jiva, soul, atman, and ultimately Brahman, the ultimate reality. Why is this understanding important in terms of healing? And how would you even describe healing?
Healing, the word heal comes from the root whole. Whole. So healing in that context is returning to wholeness, or remembering wholeness, or recognizing the wholeness that we already are. So the 3 bodies are important because they take us beyond just a physical structure. It's simply a way of drawing the attention of the mind deeper. So from the outer structure, from the atomic structure, from the cellular structure, we draw it deeper into the mental structure, right? A little bit more fluid, less cut and dry, more connective. That's the mental structure. And then from there, we can go to the energetic structure, a very palpable sense of what we are, which is embodied in yoga, in Chinese medicine, in traditions around the world as an energetic system. So as we recognize and assimilate these layers, we are becoming more and more whole. We're going from just, in this model, from a third of us, which is the physical dimension, to the second third, the complete third, and in so doing, in assimilating all three, I think there's also a synergetic effect of going beyond all three. So when all three are assimilated, it's not just all three anymore, but there is a deeper layer there. So that is healing. It's not just about curing the cellulitis that I have, the skin infection I have, or the urinary tract infection I may have, or whatever other conditions that we've been given, the labels that we've been given. That is one level of reality. But also at the deeper level, as we assimilate more and more of us, we can heal irrespective of what's happening at a single layer. Because ultimately, when all of it is assimilated, that wholeness doesn't answer to any one particular layer.
When we read about Michelangelo's art, sculpture, all of that, we know that he was very interested in anatomy, right? And when we went to medical school, the first lesson was also anatomy. It still is. They have better ways of teaching it with simulation and all that. But that creates a construct in the mind that this is a physical entity. Is what we call the material body actually material, both from a scientific point of view and from the deeper understanding of consciousness? So from the scientific point of view, when you look at the body, you see it's an activity. It's not a noun, it's a verb. It's constantly recycling earth, water, air. The atoms in your body right now weren't there a year ago. And with every experience, eating, breathing, digestion, metabolism, elimination, sensory experience, thoughts, emotions, this whole thing is an activity. If I look at people right now, look away, look at them again, that's a different snapshot, right? So even from a scientific perspective, is there, and you go beyond the atom, subatomic particles, which happen to be waves of possibility. The question is, even from scientific perspective, can we call the physical body physical? Can we call it a material entity? Or it's just the interpretation, matter is the interpretation of an experience. The body is shifting so fast that it appears to be a material thing. So I'm asking you this from a scientific perspective, but then let's go into understanding it as an appearance in awareness as well. Can you elaborate on those 2 points?
Yeah. So from a scientific perspective, all of us learn the same story, which is that the world is made up of atoms, ultimately, matter. Matter is made up of atoms, right? And I think that's true. That's a great map. That's a great map. We're talking about maps and we're talking about stories here. And that's a great map and a great story. The question then that we ask is, then what are those atoms made up of course? And then we say subatomic particles. And what are they made up of? And of course, we have elementary particles. And what are they made up of? And then we say, well, elementary particles are aspects of a wave function. And then what is a wave function? Perhaps it's an aspect of a field, depending on who you ask, and so on. So at what point, and as far as I know, physicists still say, for example, space-time is a physical thing. Space is considered a physical entity. But the physicists that I've asked, so how do you define physical? I haven't gotten a good answer for that. If we say space is physical, because ultimately if we're going back from particles to waves to fields and so on, we're going to get to a place where we get to space-time itself. So then we have to ask, what is that made of? If we say that's physical, then okay, but then what is our definition of physical anymore? What the heck does it mean anymore, right? We're basically getting to a point where we're defining physical as anything we can perceive. So I think we have to be careful with that word when we say, is this a material reality? Is this a physical reality? Anybody can say yes, but then what do we mean by physical? And I think we have to, at that point, go beyond to see what exactly is the nature of space, which may or may not be a scientific question, depending on the scientist that you talk to or the philosopher that you talk to.
So, if you go to Wikipedia right now and you check out interpretations of quantum mechanics, you'll find about 25 of them. But even today, despite these 25 interpretations, the one that's most popular is the one that came from the pioneers, the Copenhagen interpretation. And what this says is that unless there's a conscious observer looking, a conscious being looking, there's no physical universe. What exists is wave potentials. These are possibility waves. And if you ask people, scientists, where do these possibility waves exist, they'll give you some fancy word, Hilbert space. So what is Hilbert space?
Yeah, where is that Hilbert space,
Where is
right?
it? So they'll say it's a multi-dimensional infinite space. But where is it? And the answer you'll get is shut up and calculate, because it's not actually a space, it's a mathematical idea. So what I want to bring out right now with Anoop's help is that anything that we can name, whether it's a particle, subatomic particle, or it's a microphone, or it's a physical body, that's a human construct for a particular mode of knowing and experience in our own awareness. So it's a story, right? The physical world is a story, and matter is the interpretation of this experience. Where is this experience happening right now?
And a beautiful way and a crystal clear way to understand this is just to simply look at the dream you had last night, right? Crystal clear. In that dream, you were another character. Maybe you were the character you're playing now, but in a different setting. Your enemy in that dream was also you, your mind. Your friend was your mind. You know, the hot stove that you touched that burned your dream hand was also your mind. And everything in that nature was the mind. Now, in that dream, if there are dream scientists saying, this is physical, come on, we can all hear this boom, right? This is a physical thing. Everybody would nod in dream assent, saying, yes, this is physical. But the words itself don't mean anything unless we know the meaning behind that. So what does it mean when we say this is physical, right? What does it mean when we say this is physical? We can say this is physical or we can say this is mental, but the question is, what is the actual quality of our experience? How are we experiencing it? And I would offer that what we're experiencing now is the mind. This is the mind. This is the mind. It's not that the mind is in your body is in the mind. This whole thing is the mind.
And so is this. So is this.
So is this.
So is this.
There is nothing, if we're talking about manifestation, perception, understanding as a concept, any of these and all of these are aspects of the mind, you know? Ripples in the mind like ripples in a still lake.
So this is really important right now, because what you're saying is that what we experience as the physical world, including that which we call our own body, is a particular projection of the human mind, obviously, right? And then we give names to those experiences. We call them particles, we call this a hand, we call this... But in reality, all of this is a projection of the mind. Where is that mind right now? What's the location of that mind?
The only answer to that is here. because you can't give it GPS coordinates. You can't say it's in Manhattan. That mind is not in Manhattan. Manhattan is in the mind. So how can you give a location to something that defines location? The only thing you can say is here. By here, what we mean is where we identify, right? When I say here, it means here. When you say here, it means that here, that here. I won't say there because it's not there, it's here, and this is here. So how do you give a location to that in which all location is defined? You can only say it's right here. And by that, I mean in consciousness itself.
So this is a very important point. Here is not a location in space. And now, because we use these words, here and now. Now is not a moment in time. Nobody's seen a moment in time show up and then go away, followed by another moment. Have you? Have you ever experienced a moment come and then hang on for a bit and then disappear and another moment follow? So now is not a moment in time, and here is not a location in space. Now here is consciousness, is being. And it has no location in space or in time, but it is giving us the experience of this. So when I make this sound, where's this being heard?
So this sound itself is a fluctuation of the mind. The sound itself is being heard by the mind, but different aspects of the mind, right? So there are localized aspects of the mind. There's Anoop's mind, there's Deepak's mind, there's each of our minds. And these are all differentiations or aspects that are partitioned, appear to be partitioned from each other. So one aspect of the mind is producing a sound, another aspect of the mind is hearing the sound. All that is occurring where? All that is in that which is undifferentiated. That which never partitioned to begin with, but appears to be partitioned to each of our partitioned minds, and that is consciousness as a whole.
So you and I have this, we tread two worlds, right? The world of consciousness, but also the world of biology. And so most of the people we know, including neuroscientists, would say, this is being heard in the brain. Okay, that this room is being seen in the brain, right? Or if I taste something, that experience is happening in the brain. Or if I imagine something, it's happening in the brain. Right now, if I ask you all to imagine and you can try it, imagine a beautiful sunset on the ocean. Try it. You all see a picture, right? Well, there's no picture in the brain. So where is that? What's happening in the brain? Why do we think it's happening in the brain? Why do scientists talk about the brain as being the place of all experience? When, of course, we can see correlates, but why is it not the brain?
So I'll say a couple things. One is, why do scientists say that it is happening in the brain? And I don't know, maybe this is impolite, I don't know, but I would say it's the same reason I heard it so much and I was thinking about it is simply because we were told that our whole lives. You know, I mean, if you're told something at age 3, 4, 5, and you're told it over and over and over, you know, some of this sets in before the logical mind starts thinking. So those beliefs that we got before we started analyzing or assessing for ourselves independently, they became our belief system, and we then ask questions only about what comes afterwards. That is the number one reason that we generally don't talk about why we think everything is happening in the brain. Number two is that the brain is a beautiful mirror of the mind. It's a beautiful mirror in the mind. So that which is happening in the personal mind, it's very specific, the brain. The brain does not reflect everything, but that which is happening in the personal mind is reflected in the brain. So if I'm angry, you'll be able to tell on a functional MRI, there'll be certain things happening in my brain. If I'm feeling depressed, you'll be able to tell certain things happening in the brain. So there is a correlation there's a dance happening, right? Between the mind, between the mental body and the physical body. They're mirrors of each other. All three, physical, mental, energetic, are mirrors of each other. Why and how? Because they're all reflections of this underlying consciousness. And if in fact that's true, then there has to be correlation among all three, and that is what we find scientifically.
Practical level. So this is made of the mind, and the mind is made out of consciousness. And let's define consciousness. Just so consciousness is the knowing element in every experience. You know that you exist. You know that we're having this experience. And there are modes of knowing, like sound, like form, like color, taste, smell. These are modifications of consciousness, right? And those modifications of consciousness appear and disappear, arise and subside, as what we call form and phenomena, which we interpret as the physical world. And then we give labels, and we call them thoughts. These are thoughts. We have likes, dislikes, feelings. And ultimately, raw experience is just sensations, perceptions, images, feelings, thoughts, that we then label as the physical world, the physical body, the mental body, the energetic body, and then the source of all that. Great map. But if it's true, and we are saying it is, and hopefully we can give people an experience at the end, this is then made out of the mind, right? And is a modification of consciousness. And consciousness is infinitely malleable, right? It's all possibilities. What does then that do to our understanding of illness on the level of consciousness? There is the intervention, the antibiotic for acute illness, the surgery for, you're expert at that as a person who deals with trauma all the time. But aren't you treating a bundle of consciousness? And if you really understand that, then is your healing incomplete if you think of this as a physical entity?
So it is true that consciousness itself appears as the three bodies, appears as everything, quite frankly. So then why is it that if the physical body is indeed consciousness, then aren't we just treating everything? And the answer to that is no, it's not, because we're only focused on the physical body. Deepak just said that consciousness is infinitely malleable. It's infinitely malleable. It's so malleable that we can choose to partition it as we do and focus on just the physical aspect of it. And we can create entire systems out of it, which is what most of healthcare is right now. Even the field of psychiatry, which deals with mind, but the physicalized aspect of the mind, neurotransmitters, brain, things like that. There's so much focus on the physicalized aspect of the mind.
Which are constructs.
Which are absolutely construct. Everything is a construct. Everything has to be a construct, because fundamentally, if the nature of this is consciousness, then anything that we name as Deepak, as Anoop, as you, me, here, there, all these terms are constructs that we all learn together in this human society, and we share it and we send it around and we all like it and love it and shares on Facebook and all this kind of stuff happens, and we share the same vocabulary and we concretize that as concepts.
And then we're stuck in that concretization,
and then
right?
we get stuck in it. It's really it speaks to the beauty and the power of consciousness that can happen. It's just stunning. That is how malleable it is. That is how creative we are at our root. That is how creative we are. We see, and that's why, we see abstract art. We see artists, musicians express themselves so beautifully. And those forms are not so locked, right? Why do we appreciate art and music, etc.? Because they free us from those concepts that somehow innately we all know that they are limited. They're an aspect of us. So when we treat physical trauma, for example, we're treating the physicalized aspect of consciousness. And so that may heal based on treating that. But ultimately, if we're able to recognize ourselves as consciousness itself, then there's no question of disease as dis-ease. There's no dis-ease, regardless of what happens at the physical level, at the mental level, at the energetic level. When we recognize ourselves as consciousness, there is no more dis-ease. The mind may have a problem, energetic body might have a problem, physical body may have a problem, but there is no more dis-ease.
This is freeing, but it's also imprisoning, because if you don't understand that that which we call the physical body is a concretized version of a concept, and you're just stuck in that, you're never actually going to achieve true healing.
Yeah, absolutely, because even if, and this all of us have experienced, even if our physical body is perfectly healthy, even if our mind feels pretty good most of the time, and even if we feel well balanced, there can still seem to be something missing, right? In fact, many of the people who have achieved everything there is to achieve, it seems, in life, they're the ones, if you go to them and ask them, they will say, I don't know what it is, but something is missing. And what is it that's missing? It's the unawareness of the rest of themselves, of the whole part of themselves that is ever at total ease.
We'll get there in a minute, but how does this now, what we've been talking, how does this bring in the different aspects of healing in the world, from energy medicine to Qigong to Tai Chi to yoga therapy to breathing techniques, herbs, food, meditation? These are very legitimate ways of actually changing the metabolic end product of a quality of consciousness, a qualia experience. Can we now, because of this understanding, bring in these different traditions and create a scientific framework for this?
Yes, we can, and we must do that now. I really feel that this is the time now where that has to happen. We have the knowledge for that to happen. We have enough people who recognize, who have that understanding, and enough of those people are actually in influential positions where we can make a difference. And so if there are any of you in this audience now, please let's work together to do this, because this is the time. I think we have to talk about multi-directional healing. Okay, and this isn't in the book. Multi-directional healing, what does that mean? That means starting at any one point in our consciousness and healing from there in all directions. So we all know about starting in the physical body, right? If there's a broken bone, we can set the bone. If it requires surgery, we can heal with surgery, and that can contribute to healing in the mind because the pain goes away. So the mental body is also calmed; it's returned to equilibrium. And that also at the energetic body, because the energy is also imbalanced when there's a bone fracture. So that's an example of what we do now. We start in the physical body and we expand in other directions. But we should also start in the mental body. Meditation can do this. Start in the mental body and heal in the other way. There are many people who, just by meditating, they tend to get sick less often, in their own experience at least. Right? We should be able to start in the mental body, affect the physical body, energetic. We should be able to start in the energetic body and heal the other two. Right? So multi-directional healing, healing in all directions. Each healing system is unique in terms of where it starts and what it recognizes. Each one is valuable depending on the situation. And of course, healing at the level of consciousness. Because at the level of consciousness, there is already wholeness. There is already wholeness. So multi-directional healing is possible when we understand the different starting points, physical, mental, energetic, and the level of being, of consciousness itself underneath. Furthermore, the next step, once we recognize that this is what needs to be done, the next step is then codifying the three bodies in terms of each other. So it's all well and good to say the energetic body and their energy centers in the body and their meridians in the body, but what does that mean in terms of the physical body? So we need an underlying philosophy and science that integrates, and I think that's where the nature of energy and information comes in. We know that at the most fundamental level, what we can call mind is also information. It's a specific pattern. It's also energy, meaning that it is an activity. The mind is an activity. It's an undulation. It's a fluctuation. So there's energy as mind, there's information as mind, which just happens to be the particular perspective the mind takes at that time. And that shows up in the energetic body, in what we call the classical mind, which is thoughts, emotions, and also in the physical body, because we know that atoms, at a fundamental level, they have particles, have spin, And so there's information and energy also at that level. So in all three bodies, energy and information are there. And beneath that, consciousness is there. So these are some of the underlying concepts that have already been elucidated in many books. And it's high time that we start to bring these together and tie these together and start thinking in this way. This isn't a challenge to any individual system as it stands now. Rather, it challenges every system to now integrate together.
So as you know, and some of our audience also knows, we've been doing research with Nobel laureates and multi-collaborations where we've been able to show that even in a few days of a retreat, meditation retreat, the telomerase level goes up by 40%, genes that are responsible for healing and self-regulation, homeostasis go up some 17-fold over baseline. Genes that are responsible for inflammation go down significantly. We also know that only 5% of disease-related gene mutations are fully penetrant. The 95% are affected by these other factors: mental, emotional, energetic, food, sleep, stress management, being with nature. All these, if you integrate, that's 95% of all chronic illness. And, Lena is here. She's heading the Mind Brain Institute for us. And she, in her surveys, found that no matter what illness you look at, and correct me if I'm wrong, that depression is a precursor to almost every illness, whether it's Alzheimer's or any other non-communicable disease. Is that true?
A precursor and also an outcome. So it precedes, but it also proceeds.
So it precedes and also is an outcome, depression. What do you say to that? I mean, if we just focused on the fact that people go to a physician because they're feeling uneasy somewhere mentally. We can call it depression, anxiety, stress, something's wrong. Okay, but there's no way to measure it. Now we're looking, of course, at inflammation as the common ingredient, even for depression. But it's something we totally overlook. And, since this statistic came to my mind, I've asked people, do you know anyone in your family who has depression? And universally, it's like the number one problem in the world. People are in pain and they are suffering, and it all starts in what we call the mind, affecting the energetic and physical body. So, what are we missing here?
At the simplest level, we're missing the rest of ourselves. Right? I mean, to me, I keep coming back to that. That's what keeps coming up in my mind, is that, depression is multifactorial, and there are many ways to look at it. The one aspect I'm talking about is that if what I'm told I am is just a fraction of what I am, whether that leads to clinical depression or not, that's a different story. But that itself is depressing. Because innately, there will be a feeling that there is something more than this. And yet, the world is telling me differently. My parents are telling me differently. My teachers are telling me differently. All the people that are supposed to know are telling me something that is going against what I innately feel. What every human being innately feels is that there's more to this. There's something more in me. There's more to me than this. Everybody feels that, especially when we're identified with one of our layers, with one of our bodies. And so I will say it's harder to be depressed when we see all aspects of ourselves. Again, we're not just talking about clinical depression, which has its own characteristics, but just on a fundamental level of when, we all feel depressed sometimes. And how can we feel depressed if we are identifying with that which is whole? If we're identifying with that which is limitless, that which is boundless, that which is creative potential in its own right. Right? So the tendency towards depression, I think this may be the best way to put it, the tendency towards depression will be much, much, much less if we're able to recognize all of our bodies and really what's fundamental beyond that.
So Anoop, the way we know that we have a body, right? Or that which we call a body. We all say, I have a body, even though it's not a thing, it's an activity, is that we can experience it at the level of sense perception, touch it, taste it, smell it, whatever, see it, form. And what you've said is that the physical body is an excitation, a particular frequency of excitation of consciousness. For simplicity, can we call it the soul for now? That the soul is vibrating at a particular frequency as this body. Now, you and I also are familiar with techniques like Yoga Nidra. So at night, for example, when I go to sleep, I will sit up in bed, close my eyes, and first, as soon as I close my eyes, of course, I've shut off the world of form, of color, of shape. But there's still the world of sound. So I'll hear sound, and then I will ignore the sound and feel the sensations of my body without interpreting them. That, I'm feeling this because the hands are touching, but I'll just feel the sensations. They're kind of intermittent here and there. And then I'll take my attention off that, and I'll just feel the breath. And it becomes subtle and subtle. And then I'll take my attention off that. And suddenly, and this is classic Yoga Nidra and many versions of it, all there's left is this infinite awareness not having an experience. And then slowly you drift off into sleep. And from what we know, that deep state that we call deep sleep, after the fluctuations of consciousness that we call dreams. So this is a lucid dream, and then there's the subtle dream at night. But when that dies down and there is sleep, there is awareness without experience. Is that the soul? Are we returning to our soul in deep sleep? And is that why we feel so fresh when we come out of it? Is it the same thing as death? He was brought up in an environment with great Vedic teachers, even though it was in Washington, D.C.
Politics and introspection together, right? So, I just love your question. It's such a beautiful question, and I'm just kind of reveling in your question right now. So let me just enjoy this for a second. There are 3 states of human experience. So this is what we call the waking state of experience. There's a dream state that we have at night, and there's the deep sleep state. And that's it, right? The waking state and the dream state actually are very similar. There are some subtle differences, but they're very similar. The most obvious thing is that they're both of the nature of appearance. Things appear, right? At a very simplistic level, in the waking state, things appear. My body appears, your body appears, conversation appears, and so on and so forth. And in the dream state also, same thing, right? The same things appear. I mean, similar things. The details are different, but the basic organization is the same. The basic function is the same. Something projects in dream, something projects in waking. The third state is actually also similar, deep sleep, which seems so different, but with a twist. Instead of appearance, it's of the nature of disappearance. Right? So, a very simple difference. Waking, dream, deep sleep. The 3 states. Appearance. So the projector's playing, the projector's turned off. All of human life can be seen in this panel, in these three panels: waking, dream, and deep sleep. Yeah? So the question is, if we know that these three are there, how are we aware of this? See, because for us to be aware of this goes back to object permanence, which we were talking about earlier. But if we are aware of something, let's say I am aware of this red carpet here, and now I go outside and I become aware of, let's say, a taxi cab. So I'm aware of the red carpet, and later I become aware of the taxi cab. So what is common to both? It's me, right? It's my awareness that recognizes the red carpet as an object and the taxi cab as a yellow object as well. So the question is, in waking, dream, deep sleep, what is the awareness that recognizes all three? And that is the awareness it can be called the soul, that into which all of manifestation recedes, that into which it reintegrates, and that from which it differentiates again into waking state, into dream state, and it back into deep sleep. These three states of appearance, and disappearance are all illuminated by what we can call the soul, the underlying reality. And in that reality, there is no waking up, there is no sleeping, because waking up and sleeping are characteristics of our individual minds. Our individual minds wake up, and our individual minds sleep, but that awareness that illumines all three, not that somewhere else, that which is right here, which is illumining all of this right now.
In which this is happening, this is happening, this is happening, this is happening.
In which any appearance and disappearance is happening. That is that soul. So what is death then? In that context, death is disappearance. Disappearance of a form that we recognize is death. Disappearance of a form that we recognize is death. So when my body dies, it won't be recognized anymore, and people will say, Anoop died, which will be true, because Anoop as this form died, and that's true for all of us. When this form dies, that dies. Just like if a child, if you take their stuffed animal away from them, and, God forbid, throw it away or do something with it, they'll get really sad because their stuffed animal died, right? That form is no longer existent. That is what death is a change in form. And so whether it happens in sleep is a form of death, daily death that we undergo, and a daily birth we undergo in the morning. Of what? Of the individual mind. But that underlying consciousness which illumines appearance, disappearance is changeless.
And that appearance and disappearance is happening in an eternal now, because if I asked you, what happened to this morning? It's not there, right? It's gone. It's dead. What happened to this afternoon? Gone. What happened to 5 minutes ago? Gone. What happened to a minute ago? Gone. What happened to a second ago? Gone, right? So experience is ungraspable. The past is ungraspable. The future is ungraspable. And that which we call now, as experience, is ungraspable. Because by the time you get to hear the last part of my sentence, the first part has died. So in a sense, birth and death to experience are happening eternally.
Absolutely. These are birth and death are brackets that we put on experiences. They're brackets that we put on experiences. So this sentence had a beginning in time. This sentence will have an end in time. When we focus on the beginning of the sentence as a time, that's one focus. The end of the sentence is another focus, maybe a second or two later. And in that interval, a sentence was born, it grew, it flowered, it got old, it died. Right? The same thing happens for this whole conversation. The same thing will happen for all of our lives. It'll happen for the earth. It'll happen for every single construct, every single experience.
But that in which the experience is arising and subsiding
cannot
die, right?
It can't die because it was never born, right? Because it is not a concept. If it's not a concept, it can't be born. If it's not a concept, it can't be born. It is birthless, because a concept, by definition, is a form that arises out of consciousness. So a concept is a form. It has a birth. But consciousness itself is formless. It's the underlying, we can say it's a substratum of sorts. So that has no beginning, and therefore is deathless, birthless.
So Wittgenstein, the German philosopher, he said, our life is a dream. We are asleep, but once in a while we wake up enough to know that we are dreaming. What do we wake up to?
We wake up from form. We wake up from the sense of being a body or two bodies or three bodies. And what we wake up to, I have to say, it's infinity itself. It is infinity itself. It's not another form. We don't wake up into another state, for example. States can fluctuate, they can come and go. But it's not that we wake up into something, but rather we wake up out of something. We wake up out of form into the nameless.
So one of the greatest teachers of all time, I mean, for me, there are three luminaries in our own century: Nisargadatta Maharaj, Atmananda Krishna Menon, and Ramana Maharshi, and they all kind of were classic non-dualists. And there are four statements that stand out, and I'd like you to comment on that. Everything that you are experiencing, everybody right now, is a projection of their conditioned mind. We've said that already. You want to say anything more?
It is a collective projection of our collective minds. So, you know, when a child is born, do they recognize things the way we recognize things, right? I think most of us would say no. They don't yet know that a carpet is just this. They don't just know that forms end here. They're very happy to crawl right off the edge of a table, right? Because they have no idea that this is something that ends here, and here's another construct that begins here, for example. They don't know that. But when we load that information into their minds, then they start projecting what these things are. Right? What makes a genius a genius? They don't recognize the barriers that we recognize. A genius doesn't see the same restrictions. They don't project the same limitations from their mind onto the world that we might project. And that's by definition what a genius is. And that's why Michelangelo could see the whole human being and not just the physical structure. But it's not enough for one of us to see that, two of us to see that, or 10 of us. We have to reach some kind of critical mass. You talk about critical mass a lot, Deepak. So we have to reach some kind of critical mass where enough of us start to recognize that the projection itself changes. The nature of the projection itself changes. And this is where, you know, the title we're talking about, Everyday Enlightenment, this is where we start getting into what is happening in the world right now. How we actually change through true activism, how we actually change what's happening in the world right now. And that's through seeing this greater vision, seeing that we are projecting that which we have learned. And by perhaps unlearning or seeing beyond that, the nature of what we project changes.
You brought up an important point, which Paulette and I talk about a lot. Activism, you know, Paulette's one of the luminaries in the activism world, and we speak about sacred activism instead of the strident activism that leads to polarization, whether it's I'm a Republican, I'm a Muslim, you're a Christian, you're a Democrat. Where does this understanding, where can it lead to a true activism that we actually move towards a more peaceful, sustainable, healthier? How do we upgrade the dream, in other words?
Yeah, that's a beautiful way to phrase it. How do we upgrade the dream? So we upgrade it by looking beyond my own projections of the world, my individual projections of the world. What I think I am, what I see as my own limitations, I tend to project out into the world as well. But if I can step back from my individual identity and say, hey, you know what? Anoop's not perfect. He's got a lot of issues, and he's working on them, and that's okay. But that's also not all of what I am. So he might project some things, but there's also a greater awareness that holds the whole picture, in which we recognize that each of us has our own things that we're dealing with, but there's our primary identity, or that greater aspect of us, is beyond that individual, And by holding that whole picture, the nature of activism changes, because the activity of the activism is not coming only from the individual mind in that case. There's room there, there's spaciousness there for malleability, for creativity, for new things to come in, for not thinking that, oh, my plans were ABC, but something happened to B, and this is not working anymore, now what am I going to do? But there's always a creative uprising. There's always something creative coming in. And that, I think, that kind of activism can happen when we are not only aware of the individual identity, but aware of the bigger picture.
Point number 2. The true self, who you really are, was never born. You addressed that. So that which is speaking right now and that which is hearing right now was never born. What does this do to my fear of death?
Fear of death in the individual can go away only when the identity that is crystallized in that individual is released. Yeah, so why does an individual fear death? The individual fears death because they're so sure that they are that form. And so when that form ends, my whole world ends, because I can't perceive my world anymore, right? So fear of death is actually fear of transformation, fear of changing that form to which I've become so addicted because I've spent my whole life with this thing, right? So,
but it's never been the same.
It's never been the same, because what I'm experiencing as this thing is a series of activities. But when the thoughts become circular, when the thoughts become recurrent over and over and over, then I'm spending time with those same thoughts. Even if it's not the exact same one all the time, it's recurring so much.
And the thought is not even your own, it's the collective conditioned mind that's recycling that you kind of hold on to, right?
Yeah, you know what it reminds me of? When I was a kid, and I used to ride a bike sometimes, I used to pretend it was a motorbike. I'd put a card in the spokes, right? And you get this kind of sound. But when you first start cycling with the card in there, all you hear is like, doom, doom. That's the one thought, I am the body, doom. Once in a while, doom. When we start as infants, doom. I am the body. I am the body. And we get faster, I am the body. Doom, 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 doom. And now it's all of a sudden, I am the body, I am the body. I am this, I am this, I am this. We repeat this mantra to ourselves all the time. And then all of a sudden, it's not just like, oh yeah, maybe I'm the body, I've heard it once in a while. It seems like a continuous experience, this body. It crystallizes, it literally forms, like Michelangelo chiseled out that form to concretize it. We concretize this thought as something physical, as though there's actually something physical here. But it's a concept that has become hardened because of constant repetition, because our parents did it. And, you know, I'm not blaming our parents. I'm doing it too in some way, right? So it's just when we raise our awareness to beyond that, then this doesn't become concretized.
Point number 3. Who you really are is nothing conceivable or perceivable. If you can perceive it or conceive of it or think about it or imagine it, that's not real.
So I think here we can spend some time on the word real. When we say it's not real, especially in non-duality and Vedantic traditions, I think the word real is one of the most misunderstood words, because it's easy to say, this is unreal, for example. I think a better way to understand it is saying that this is ever-changing. Forms are ever-changing. So when Vedanta speaks about unreal, it means that which changes, that which is not permanent. So forms are always changing. Whatever form you take, it will always change. Even if it's a diamond, there is a time at which it formed, and there is some time at which it will disintegrate, even if it's not in our lifetimes. So every form has a beginning, every form sustains for a while, every form disintegrates and disappears. How do we know that? Every single one of us knows that, right? Every single one of us knows that every form has a beginning and every form has an end. Whether it's a thought, an emotion, an intuition, whether it's some feeling of energy, whether it's something physical, mental, doesn't matter. We all understand that. How do we understand that? There is a changeless background on which change is recognized, that every person is privy to. that every person is privy to,
And
regardless.
would we call that the soul for lay person's
Yes.
language?
Yeah, I think that soul is that which is unchanging underneath all that. And only because of that and because of the innate awareness from there, all of us recognize that every form changes whenever we turn our attention to that. So that is not perceivable as a form. It is that which perceives, it's that which knows, it's that which sees, it's that which enlivens all of our activities. But by itself, it can't be known.
It illumines the mind, it illumines the body, it illumines this world.
Yes. It is of the nature of illumination itself.
Final point. Is there something called ego? Because we kind of, it's the big thing these days amongst our leaders in the zeitgeist, whether it's the little fat man or it's whoever. What is ego?
Getting bold. What is the ego? I would say, when I was investigating this, what is the ego? Ultimately, it seems to keep shifting. It's almost like this wild animal that keeps shifting, and you're trying to find it and keep shifting. And ultimately, what I came to is that there's no thing like ego. There's no particular substrate. There's nothing that you can hold on to that's there like the ego. It feels like it when it's unexamined, but the more we look at it, the more it seems to be shifty, and then eventually it just seems to not be there. So what is that ego? To me, it's the series of thoughts that circle over and over and over again, and they relate to each other and forms like a little cobweb, right? So I was born in D.C., one thought. How many times have I repeated that in my life? I don't know, right? And then, I grew up in Maryland, another one. I spent some time in India, another one. I learned some Vedanta, another one. So some of these, now all of a sudden, Anoop is starting to form, right? After all, who is Anoop? If I can't say he was born in D.C., if I can't say his parents came from India, if I can't say that he went to medical school, if I can't say all these things, how are we going to talk about Anoop? You can't. So each of us have a kind of a core story, a few thoughts that we repeat that are the most important, or at least the most prevalent in our lives, and the relationships those form, that is the ego, that set of relationships.
So without those repetitive stories, are we the infinite mind? Are we God?
Yes, and it depends how you say God. So in religion, oftentimes God is as like some supernatural creature, supernatural, man, sometimes with a white beard on a thunderbolt, getting ready to strike and all kinds of things, and there's a devil on the other side and all these things. So that's one way to think about it. I wouldn't say it's God in that sense, but if God is infinity itself, if God is that which is without form, and we say it's omnipotent, omniscient, omnipotent, why? Because all activities occur in it. Not because he's a big muscled guy who's got all these things, but all activities occur in consciousness, then consciousness is omnipotent. If all locations are nothing but expressions of consciousness, then consciousness is omnipresent, right? And if all kinds of knowledge occur in it, then it's omniscient. So not because it gains something powerful and it stands apart as something mighty, not that kind of God, but the God that simply by its nature, self-effulgent nature, expresses as all these things, then of course that's going to have all those characteristics ascribed to it. That, yes, I would say that is God, and that is our ultimate nature.
How do
also.
we make this practical? What is everyday enlightenment? We promoted this as an evening.
Shall we do a short meditation then?
Let's do it.
Okay. So about how many minutes should we do? A few short minutes? Okay. Okay, sure. So we said a lot of heady stuff today, some heady stuff. We talked about maps, we talked about models, we talked about all those things. And let's just try something very simple now. Just consider for a moment, just relax, eyes open or eyes closed, whichever you prefer. And just consider for a moment that your body is in the mind. Your body is in the mind. All thoughts are in the mind. All of us are sitting as forms in the mind. Whether the eyes are open or the eyes are closed, all of this is occurring in the mind. All of this is occurring in the mind. And so there's nowhere to go, and there's nothing to do. We're simply relaxing into the greater mind, out of just the body into the greater mind. And there may be thoughts floating around that mind. There may be feelings, doubts, all of it forms of the mind. There's nowhere to go. You can't go anywhere because you're surrounded and soaked by the mind. You're soaking in the mind. Your brain doesn't have to do anything special. It too is soaking in the mind. All sounds, all images, all sensations, aspects of the mind. Where could you possibly go? And how could you possibly get anywhere? It's all the mind. So if all this is the mind, then what is it that is aware of that? And there's no intellectual answer to the question. It's simply a question to be soaked in as another part of the mind. The mind is asking itself, if all this is the mind, what is aware of this mind? It doesn't know the answer. Continue relaxing. Take some easy and full breaths. And just continue to soak and sink into the mind. All sounds, all impressions, including the impression of me as an individual identity. Of the sensation of myness, my feet, my hands, my thoughts. Also impressions in the mind. And as the mind relaxes itself, as it undoes itself and unwinds itself, that which illumines the mind remains. However that appears or shows up or feels will be different, so I won't give it a name. It's not a form. It's not a sound. You can trace its scent through that feeling of relaxation. That's the scent it leaves behind. Follow that scent, not by tracking it, but by relaxing further along it. Now I'll ask you to slowly open your eyes, and as you do, recognize that nothing is changing as you're opening your eyes. Forms are appearing, surely, but there's no fundamental difference in the process, in the configuration of what's happening. Appearance, disappearance. Appearance, disappearance. All in that mind, illumined by something more fundamental.
Before we finish, then, where is love?
Love is the feeling that comes when the part of me that's Anoop recognizes a part of you that's Deepak. That feeling of sameness in difference, within difference. Each of us is different. But when that difference is recognized within a sameness, that's love. Without that difference, it's not even love, it's something beyond love. But when we can recognize the beauty of that difference within the sameness, that's love.
So in Vedanta they say when you see yourself in an object, when you see yourself in this object, that's beauty. And when you see yourself in another person, that's love. Are love and beauty the same?
There are words that describes different aspects of the same experience. When you love someone, you see them as beautiful. When you love something, you see it as beautiful. You can't love something and think it's ugly. Beauty and love come together. They're two aspects of something undescribable, indescribable.
Thanks. Thank you. In case you're interested, the book is available on Amazon. Okay? Thank you. Thank you very much.